Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 261. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the highly talented and internationally acclaimed world builder and comic creator, Matta Sorcier.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's going. I'm alive and I'm not on fire, so it's a good day.
That's true. Yeah. See, that's a great way to actually like start the day and end the day not being on fire. So that's
Yeah.
good. Yeah. And I watching your previous interviews that you talked about this, about you getting in the depths of like how you do your world building and how you would absolutely would not want to be in this world that you've created. Um, I love that, is because other artists and others are like, oh, I'd love to be, but you're like, there is no way I would want to be a part of
No,
the
I'd
world that I've
never
created.
survive. I'm so boring. I will admit it that like if I was like transported into a video game world or something, I would not be the hero. I'd be the little NPC off to the side, like, selling you like bread rolls to heal yourself and stuff. Like I do not want action. I do not want adventure. I do not want to fight things. Like fantasy worlds are horrifying. There's magic, there's creatures, there's just too many things can go wrong.
Talk to us a little bit about Sacrimony, and this has been a progress that you've been working on this. You've been working on this story for well on 2 decades now.
Oh my god, yeah, since I was like its early beginnings was when I was like a little 12-year-old. So my god, that was
Mm.
like 26 years ago. Yeah, and it's just been sitting in my head, and like there were times where I thought that like, oh, I'm going to grow out of this. I'm going to get like a real adult job, and then, it just kept like creeping back in every so often like, hey, remember me? I'm that cool story idea that you had. And then I was like, real adult jobs suck. Maybe I should just do comics.
Yeah, so talk to us a little bit about just the world that you've created in Sacrimony.
But yeah, it's basically a world where the gods are like jerks. If you imagine kind of like the worst of like Greek mythology or like Egyptian mythology, stuff like that, like a world where the gods do interact with the mortals, and like the gods themselves have their own sort of like dysfunctional family setup that it kind of ends up affecting the mortals.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, what happens is the main plot of the story is that a teenage girl died, but then she got better, and basically, there's a catch that she came back to life with like demon wings, no memory of her past, magical powers, and she and her mom have to deal with that now. And they have a really strained dynamic because Kujad, the girl's father, was like not a great person.
Mm-hmm.
So the mother, Unica, like, she's basically a domestic abuse survivor, and she is stuck with a kid that she never particularly wanted, that also now has these demon wings. So it's just sort of that extra layer of like, I don't want to be in the situation. I've already kind of like mentally checked out, but like, I have a conscience. I can't leave this kid behind in the cold. So I guess I have to take her with me because like, none of this is her fault.
Mm.
So yeah, it's a drama story. It's not about like action adventure or who can like punch the hardest or whatever. It's more about like, family and friendship, just getting through being dealt a bad hand in life. Like a lot of people say that it feels kind of like Saga, like how Saga is more about, family relationships and like, character building more so than just like, oh, hey, let's go fight and save the world.
This for the first chapter that you put out is, did you rewrite this since your first iteration of it?
You did your homework. Yes, I did. I rewrote it and I redrew it because I had tried to release a graphic novel version of the full chapter one like back in 2017. I mean, it didn't do very well because I didn't know how to build an audience back then, but also it was just like the art and the writing were really rough. I
Mm.
didn't like I was working with media that I was like I hadn't practiced with. Like I wasn't very great with digital coloring. I was trying to use like a type of inking tools and stuff that like I wasn't like I didn't have the technical skill to do the things that I wanted to do. I had a hard time figuring out what I needed to do. I second guessed myself a lot. and I held back because I was like, people want a comic where like things are like fast paced and like a lot of things are going on, and I can't like slow down and explore the characters because people want to move the story forward. And it turns out like that's not what people want. People want to get to know the characters. They want to
Mm,
slow down. They want to like, see these very organic conversations where like the characters feel like people. Like the main focus is the characters and not like the plot that's happening in the background. So like from the people who read the original version and like the webcomic and stuff back in the day, and like reading this new updated version that I did now, it's like they're like, yes, you absolutely made the right decision. Before I went through with it though, like people did look at me like I was crazy, like, oh, you're rebooting your series, like why would you do that, because everyone's so used to mainstream comics always rebooting and rebooting and rebooting. And
right.
they thought that was like the cycle that I was gonna get caught up in, but I was just like, no, I absolutely know that I need to start like all the way from the beginning again and like do the story justice.
Right. And from that perspective, how did you see like your storytelling and your artwork evolve?
Uh, I mean, like more that you draw, basically, the better you get. So like I actually did almost like 300 pages of this story before I decided to restart. So like by the time I got to page 300, looking at page 300 versus looking at the old page 1, I was like, I need to do something that like reflects what I'm capable of doing now. And also
Right.
my writing had gotten a lot better because I started to figure out like what I needed to do versus what I thought people wanted.
Hmm.
So I stopped second guessing myself. I just like I practiced, I got better at drawing, and I was able to like pull off something that I'm super proud of and will never redo ever again in my life.
Is this pencil to paper or is this digital? How do you do this?
I jump around a lot actually. Like
Okay.
sometimes like I definitely do the thumbnails digitally because like I have problems with spatial recognition and scaling and stuff. So doing the thumbnails digitally lets me like resize things really quickly and like drag them around and move them. And
Hmm.
then like if I feel like it, I'll do the pencils in actual pencil or I'll do them digitally. Colors are also they're done digitally, but I think from now on I'm gonna do them traditionally, which I know is kind
Okay.
of like a bonkers thing to do, but like I got tired of doing digital. I felt more like a machine than an artist because when you start to find all of these shortcuts to do things quicker and quicker, there's like more of a disconnect. So I'm
Right.
like, I'm gonna slow down and just like from issue 6 and on until whenever I feel like it's gonna be done traditionally with like traditional markers and paints and stuff. Like the cover for this book I actually did in traditional marker.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so is marker a colored pencil and like acrylic marker because like at that point I was just like I can't do another digital piece. My brain was like kicking and screaming like no, don't make me do it. And as soon as I put the marker on paper, I was just like this feels so right. Like there's just a
Right.
nice like tactile sensation of like feeling the actual marker on the page and feeling like all the pencils and stuff and the different textures as opposed to just like the same smooth pen over the same smooth screen over and over again. Like it just hits a good happy spot in my brain.
And so this here, like the Kickstarter that we're looking at, is the first 5 issues basically of the story. Is this like an entire arc? Is this a larger meta plot, or is this an ongoing story that you're going to be following?
It's an ongoing story. I'm guessing by the time I'm done, I'm gonna be like 87 years old and I'm gonna be on like, it's gonna be somewhere probably between like 50 to 70 issues because we follow these characters around for a long time. Like a lot of things happen to them. There's also a lot of like backstory to explore because I do like doing like flashbacks and stuff. Like each particular chapter, which is like a 5 issue chunk, kind of revolves around a particular character and it goes like into their backstory as far as like, all right, like how did they end up becoming the person they are in the present story, which is always really fun to explore. A lot of this is based off of real life, even though it's like a fantasy story. But basically, I like the concept of that like you're not the same person that you are in front of your friends versus like in front of your family versus in front of strangers, like, and it's not a bad thing, it's just the way that people operate where it's like you click a certain way with your family, you click a certain way with your friends, you like want to present yourself a certain way to strangers, you curate certain parts of yourself for like online. And like a lot of Sacrimony explores that about the characters in terms of like, this guy may be this way to his wife, but then, he was like a hero to other people. He was like a hero for humanity. And like, this is how he ended up being a hero, and like just diving further and further back and seeing that, like, even you're not the same person you were even like 20 years ago or 30 years ago or whatever. Like, people are always changing, and the experiences shape the person that they become now in like the present story.
Did you have the characters in mind first, or did you have the world first?
I had the characters first, and they sat around for a long time, and they went through a lot of different like incarnations. Like, basically, as a teenager or whatever, they were much more like darker, edgier. Everyone had like these gigantic swords because that was like the cool thing to do back in the 2000s. And then like, as I'm glad I didn't come out with the comic back then, because it would be completely different. But they basically changed like as I grew and like got more worldly experience and stuff, and how my own perspective changed, and then they became what they are now. And then I started building the world around them. So the world was kind of the last thing to come together.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was just like, what did the world need to be in order for these characters to be who they are now?
And so when you did the world building aspect, what part of it were you enjoyed doing, and what parts were you just, what were some of the things that you really loved doing, and what were the things that you just chored on?
I hate map building. I still haven't like come out with an official map, but like I have one just kind of like kicking around as a file on my computer that I will release eventually. But I think my problem is that I with the map that I overthink things. So I'm like, well, this has to be in like a temperate zone, and the temperate zone is like located like right in this little spot. Like, because I want to go for realistic. I want to look like I know what I'm doing, even though I might not know what I'm doing. But building the religion was also hard because I had to figure out the exact story of like how the world was created, because like religion plays a huge part and the gods play a huge part, and who takes credit for creating the world and stuff like that. And just figuring out like the system of the afterlife, because that kind of played a role also, because it's like if certain heroes die, then they get to become gods, and like what's that like what do they get to do? And yeah, like that was probably the hardest part. And the governments they're kind of fun because it's like I get to play around with like different completely made up cultures and like make these bizarre cultural standards. Like there's one particular race where it's like the more wealthy you are, the more immobile you make yourself. So it's like, they have like tons of fabric and like really super long nails and like these really high shoes, and it's like, the point of that is to show like, oh, well, I can pay other people to do everything for me, and I can just sit around and, look a certain way.
Right.
And like doing stuff like that is so fun, and it's so stupid, but I love it.
Now, because you did mention in a previous interview too, is that you really didn't like when you actually like the idea of like elves and dwarves are all in their own very stereotypical thing, and you love kind of turning that on its side by actually being a lot more empathetic and proactive when it comes to different cultures as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, it's like what I never really liked about the traditional fantasy was that it was really like, all right, well, like elves have to be a certain way, dwarves have to be a certain way, and that's what like
Right.
people come to expect. So like I thought that if I just labeled everything like, oh, elves, dwarves, gnomes, whatever, like people would already have that like idea of what they should be in their heads, and like that's no fun for me. I would rather just make up something completely unexpected and just keep people guessing as to like what these people are like, and it's just another layer for people to like enjoy exploring when they
Right.
start learning about all of these like bizarre cultures and stuff. And I also tried really hard not to make any specific culture like mirror anything in real life, because I
Hmm.
it's a slippery slope. Like I hate it. Like, even D&D was guilty of this, where it's like, all right, well, this race is like reminiscent of like Native American or African tribes, and oh, by the way, they have like -2 intelligence, and like, oh gee, thanks.
Yeah, I
Like
know.
it's really messed up. So I tried to avoid that like the plague, because it's not fun.
Right. So like you do have, and what I love what you do on your website as well is that you do kind of create like almost a little bit of a wiki almost where you talk about like your different months of the calendar and different races. Uh, how much does that play into from, because you also love playing like the D&D background you mentioned when you were talking about like the misadventures of Buddy and Friend, which is the idea of like you love what happens if you roll a one all the time, in a sense, like just making that really fun. Do you have you ever thought about, and you must have, what am I talking about, you must have thought about the idea of taking this world and seeing what it would look like in a role-playing game module?
That would be interesting. That's kind of a dream of mine. Like right now, actually, for Sacrimony issue 6, I'm also releasing an encyclopedia of the world and like all the races and stuff, which I kind of have been advertising as like the D&D player's handbook without all of the boring rules. So it's like you get to learn about all of the calendar months and the races and locations and stuff that I mentioned. And there's also like a character bio section. I know I'm getting ahead of myself because this is like July me's problem, but I'm super excited about it, and I hope that people are really excited about like my wacky world building.
Right. And so what are some of those aspects that you see that, as we mentioned earlier about just like taking, like removing stereotypes from races in a way? What are some of the other things that you're incredibly proud of when it comes to the world building aspect of this?
Architecture. I
Okay.
love architecture. Like I love designing like weird unexpected architecture where it's like for example, I wish I had an example on the actual Kickstarter page, but like I have sort of, the holiest headquarters, which is supposed to be sort of like, all right, well, it's basically the Sacrimony equivalent of the Vatican, but I made it look absolutely nothing like the Vatican because I thought that it like that environment looks really sterile where it's just like white buildings and
Right.
clean streets or whatever. So I did this whole area with like these like elaborate like gold and purple towers, and there's like plants cascading everywhere, and like it just looked really lush and alive, and I was like, I love this part.
I'm pulling up, like looking at some of your the covers you did or
If you go to, oh man, I can probably send you a link for the Sacrimony 5 campaign, and there's actually the building that I'm talking about. I'll put it in the chat, and you can probably
okay.
pull that up and scroll down.
Oh, I'm on there. I have it on here. I pulled it up. Oh,
Oh,
okay, this is new.
yeah, it's for
Okay.
the single issues when I launched that back last year, I think.
Oh,
It's
okay.
all a blur to me now, but yeah, it was the single issue campaign.
Okay. Let me pull that up.
All of my ridiculous add-ons that I don't have this time around, and I'm kind of glad because they make things very complicated.
All right, where is
Keep
the...
going, keep going.
Oh,
There
right
we
here.
go. That's it. Yep. I love doing stuff like that. It takes
So talk,
forever and a half, but it's absolutely worth it.
and so you mentioned as well as that there, how important is religion in this world that you've created? Because you do have it about based off of gods and goddesses.
Religion is really important. Like, I feel like in this particular world, it's hard to be an atheist or even an agnostic because the gods do actually directly interact with mortals in a way.
Hmm.
They don't affect like daily activities or anything. It's not like, a god's gonna come down and punish you. But as far as like, if they see a mortal that stands out particularly, they might choose them as like a champion, give them divine powers to kind of help them out a little. And then if the champion fulfills their purpose, then they become a god. So it's like, and then when they become a god, the mortals are actually notified, like, hey, there's a new god. So it's hard for you to be like, oh, I don't believe in the gods when it's just like, this big idol just drops out of nowhere and it's like, hey, this is your new god.
Right. Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about like what are some of the things that you learned also from previous Kickstarters that whether it be tier levels or other things that you've noticed that like, yeah, do not, whatever you do, don't do this. Like, what are some of the other things that, or what are some of the tier levels that you seem being very successful that it's always good to do this?
One thing I learned was do variant covers. Like my first campaign didn't have any variants. My second didn't either because I was just like I love doing covers, but I always felt like I don't know, like selling the same book with like different exclusive cover. Like, was it something that was really going to work for me? Like, I guess like, that'll work for mainstream comics because they have like big name artists or whatever, and like the
Mm.
names alone will sell a cover. But like it felt weird to me that it was just like, all right, well, it's just me doing the art, the coloring, and everything, and I'm just doing multiple covers of my own. And like, yeah, like variant covers are cool.
So I'm really curious as well. Is like, how does this fit within the your misadventures of Buddy and Friend? Are these obviously the style is different? Are these world adjacent, or is this just a different version of Sacrimony?
They're two completely different worlds.
Okay.
So yeah, like Sacrimony is my, my homebrew setup where I made up everything. And The Misadventures of Buddy and Friend is more like I rented an apartment from Tolkien, got completely wasted, trashed the place, and he's not giving me my security deposit back.
It's like it just feels like you just really had a good time with it. Like you just had a really good time doing this one.
Yeah, because it's fun to like take the stereotypical fantasy trope and just completely turn it on its head. And
Hmm.
that's what I love doing with The Misadventures of Buddy and Friend. Like right off the bat, there's that like stereotypical tavern brawl going on, and it's like the main character is supposed to be the hero that saves the day, and everyone's like, "Oh my god, like thank you so much, you saved us." But like with this, everything just gets turned on its head. He ends up being the bad guy, and he gets thrown in jail, and then like has to do community service, and it becomes like this whole ordeal of like he just keeps rolling ones. Basically, that's the best way to say it.
And so so with this, is this almost like a kind of like a break from the seriousness of Sacrimony? Do you like write this as a kind of as a mental release compared to what you do with Sacrimony?
It's like my own little personal Prozac.
Yeah.
Because yeah, Sacrimony, there's a lot of like different emotions in Sacrimony, but it does get like really heavy at times. So it's nice to have something that's like much more stress free to work on.
Right. Yeah.
So like the style is simpler, the writing is a lot simpler. I don't need to like, fully engage all of my like sad feels, emotions, or anything. It's just like, people smacking each other around. Like people like that.
Right. The two styles are completely separate, and the stories are completely separate. Do you see those that seem to back that Kickstarter? Is it the same people that back Sacrimony, or are you tapping into a almost like a different readership?
It's a different readership. Like there were
Okay.
some people from Sacrimony who followed me over to Buddy and Friend when I launched it earlier this year, but then I saw like this whole like onslaught of new backers that I've never seen before who are just here for this absolute fantasy nonsense.
Right.
So, trying to get them to back Sacrimony, they're not particularly having it because they're there for the more like traditional fantasy feeling type thing, and like to each their own. Like
Right.
as long as
Yeah.
they enjoy Buddy and Friend, like I'm cool with it.
How are you being able to put your time in on this?
Luckily, Buddy and Friend is like a short series. It's like 20
Yeah.
issues at most.
Right.
So, I mean, at least I won't be working on that till I'm 87, but it's a lot easier to draw. Like I can definitely knock out a Buddy and Friend book in like less than a month as
Yeah.
opposed to like Sacrimony that usually takes me 2 or 3 months per book.
Right.
So it's like I alternate. So it's like work on one Sacrimony book, finish that, then like knock out a Bunny and Friend book, and then like go back to Sacrimony. So
Mm.
I'm still figuring it out because I only launched Buddy and Friend this year. So I'll see how I manage. But I'm thinking like if I at least do like 2 Buddy and Friend books and like 2 Sacrimony books a year, like I'm good.
Do you write an entire script out and then kind of proofread it? And do you have somebody who kind of like line edits it, or do you write it out, then you just do the, and then you just, describe the process of making, say, issue 6 of Sacrimony? How does that work?
Uh, I am absolutely horrible at writing scripts. It's because there's such a disconnect with like typing words on paper versus like what I actually need to do on the page. So it's like
Right,
every time I've tried to make a script, it's just been like complete derailment as far as like, how long a conversation can be reasonably before it's just like, taking up too many pages. So I found out that the best way to do it was just to slap the actual dialogue on the comic page itself, because I'm doing it digitally, so I can put the words there, figure
right,
out like how much room it takes up, and then figure out how to edit it based on like, all right, if this conversation goes on for like more than 3 pages or whatever, that's like it's too long. Like no one's gonna want to read this entire long drawn out conversation. So then like, how do I chop it down? How do I make it like more easily digestible? Because it's really important to me for Sacrimony to make the reading like easy to digest, easy to read, easy to get through. Like I don't want somebody to be sitting there for like an hour trying to like figure out how to read like a 30-page book.
right,
Like I don't want to pretend to be like an intellectual and throw in like all of these dramatic monologues and soliloquies or whatever it is that people use when they think that they're intellectual. It's like I want the characters to feel like real people. I want the conversations to feel real.
right,
I I want people to be able to read my book. Like
right,
because I think a lot of people actually get intimidated by the art because the art is so fancy. Like I don't mean to toot my own horn, but like I do put in a lot of effort into making the art like, look very polished, look very fancy, very like high end, but like
right.
I feel like it scares people because then they're like, "Oh, like this book must think so highly of itself, like like it must be made by like an intellectual or something." And it's like, "No, I am like the lowest of the lowbrow kind of person there is." Yeah, I just want it to feel real. I want people to be able to read it and just be like, "All right, I get this."
Do you see this as well as that each time that you come out with a new Kickstarter and a new issue, you bring on more readers for each one as well?
Yeah, luckily for the single issues, like every single issue that I released has gotten better and better. Like I started off as like, a little baby
Right,
creator with like Sacrimony 1 getting 98 backers, which I think is still super impressive for like having just kind of come out of nowhere basically.
right,
And then, Sacrimony like the single issue 5 had ended with like 192 backers.
right,
And, between Sacrimony 1 and 5, it was like I had like 121 backers and 132, then it was like 154, and then there was like a jump to
right,
192. And like, yeah, I know the trade paperback isn't going to get as many backers because there are people who are like, "Oh, well, I have like the 5 single issues already. I don't really need this." But like,
right,
this is for the people who want like all of the story in one spot. It's like a good place for new readers to jump in, and also the cover is just very nice. I'm very proud of that cover. I'm so happy that I sold the original art like last week because I had
nice.
that as a reward. I had the original pencils as a reward also, and like that sold out on the second day. And I'm like, I'm creating art. It actually feels like I'm creating art now.
When I love that, and here's the thing: your log line for this is fantastic. A tale of love, life, and death in no particular order.
Thank you.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, because a lot of it deals with like, characters dying or like the afterlife and stuff. So it's just like the in no particular order just felt so right to put.
Right. And I love, like in your style, especially this, definitely reminds me of like the Art Nouveau style. It
Yes,
seems very
it is
much like
such a
that.
huge influence. Like I love the Art Nouveau style. I love
Right.
like, the fact that they incorporate text and everything. Cause I mean like a lot of Art Nouveau stuff, like particularly like Mucha and stuff was just like really fancy advertisements. So you'd see these like
Yeah.
elaborate drawings just for like cigars or like bread or something, and
Right.
like where is that now? Like, why don't we still have that?
I know. No, it's beautiful. I love the Art Nouveau style. It's gorgeous.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Mata, for those that want to learn more about your work, where's the best place they could go to?
msorcier.com is kind of like my hub for everything at the moment, because the webcomic site
Okay.
is around, but there's not a lot on there right now since I decided to take the hiatus. Yeah, so there's like my little gallery, little bio, and then there's like links to my Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, the latest Kickstarter, and an online shop in case like you missed out on past issues and want to catch up. I should update that shop actually.
You will always have Kickstarters coming out anyway, so they could
Yeah,
always.
I pretty much live on Kickstarter right now. So even if you go to like msorcier.com/Kickstarter, it will just take you to my latest Kickstarter, and you can just like pick up my stuff there.
Right. And those that miss this, to make this an evergreen podcast, for those that want to, as they say, what if you miss a Kickstarter, you won't be there'll be some very specific things you could get out of Kickstarter, but the book itself, the main books that you would be having, they could probably buy through you shop.
Yeah,
Okay.
msorcier.com/shop.
Right. Perfect. Cool.
It was
All
a
right. Well,
pleasure
thank you
talking
very
to you.
much. Yeah, you're welcome.
In the art and writing department, because I second guessed myself a lot. Can you hear my cat? He is just very loud and belligerent right now, and I apologize. Yeah, he's just anyway, he completely derailed my train of thought. But yeah, it was just like I